Hi everyone, since I'm too tired to read this on my own, I can't really read this when I'm driving. So I'm gonna try to create a recording for this one I can listen to, and I'll try to do my best. Okay, so the Republic Act number 5734, this was the prior act before the 9292 of the Electronics and Communications Engineering Act of the Philippines, or Law of the Philippines. 1992 was, I think, Electronic Engineering, tinanggal nila yung communications. But right before that one, there is what we call the Electronics and Communications Engineering Act of the Philippines, RA 5734, passed or published on June 21, 1969. Ang isa niyang pangalan is, yung nagkaiba lang naman actually is yung law na word and yung act na word. Okay, so we have here several sections, and I divided, I think, the sections into three parts. The first part is yung section 1, title of the act. Section 2, practice of electronics and communications engineering. We have here also details about the registration or the certificates of registration, specifically on the section 3. The section 4 up to 10, though, that's the second part. So we have here the first part, 1, 2, and 3 section. And then we have here on the second part all about board examination details. We have the section 4, board examination. Section 5, pre-qualifications for the examination. Section 6, schedule of the examination. Section 7, scope of examination. Section 8, rating in the examination. Section 9, report of rules of examination. And Section 10, the fees for examination and registration. So I put them in the second part of, my mnemonics. So we have your 1, 2, 3, then 4 to 10. 1 to 3, I think, is TPR, like total physical response. In ESL, we have this term that we call total physical response, where we have to add actions and gestures, not just teach the children so that the children can absorb what we are teaching well, especially if they're not yet adept with the language that we are using. So for English, most of them are non-native speakers in English, so we do TPR, total physical response. Now for this one, I made that as my mnemonics because T is for title of the act, P, practice of electronics and communications engineering. This is also physical, so practice. Total, that's gonna be title total. Anyway, I just played with it. R is just there, R, response. Registration, certificates of registration, it doesn't have anything related to it, but just like putting it there. So TPR for sections 1 to 3, the first part of our mnemonics. And then the second part, we have, this one is a bit complicated though. Okay, I think I put it into BPSSRF. So BP, blood pressure. BPSS, RRF. BP is the board examination and the pre-qualifications for examination. So there are several ones. I'm still gonna have to create mnemonics for this later on. And then we have here the next one is the SS. So for section 6 and 7, 6 and 7, they're both S, right? 6 starts with S, and 7 starts with S. So I put here schedule of the examination, and scope of examination. 6 and 7, they're all SS. Okay? Mauuna lang, schedule would come first, okay, before the discussion of the scope. Alright? And then we have your RRF. RRF starts at section 8. We have rating in the examination. What is the actual percentage that you will be passing the exam? Reports of rules, say you already have your scores. And reports of rules of exam. I mean, this is not rules. I think the reports of results. This one I think is an erratum, or an error. We have here reports of results. This should be results, not rules. Results of examination. We're gonna have to correct that one. And we have here fees for examination and registration. I was just thankful that I did not use this one in the beginning. This note, okay, I think this is from the corpusjuris.com. I just thankful that I did not use that one, and I think I used the one that the Lawphil was publishing. So Lawphil, asa mo yung Lawphil? somewhere over here. Anyway, I can't see it now, but lawfil.net, lawfil.net, lawfil. Anyway, I forget about that one. But that's supposed to be, section 9 is supposed to be report of results of examination. Because after you have checked the exam, there will be ratings or results of passers and non-passers. They will be submitted to the Commissioner of Civil Service, etc. And then the last one that was discussed is the fees for examination and registration. Personally, this should have been, if I'm, if I existed before and I was the one of the creators of this act, I would prefer the board examination, that the fees would come after the pre-qualifications, before the schedule of the examination. But in here, it's on section 10. So fees for examination and registration. And then the third section, we have the third section. That's section 4 to section 10. That's for the second part of our mnemonics. The last part, I haven't really created a mnemonics for this one. I haven't had the time. We have here the roster of electronics and communications engineering. This is going to be on the board. Okay, roster. Roster, I think section, no, okay. So section 4 to section 11. I'm gonna have to redo my mnemonics. It should be section 4 and section 11, RRFR. RRFR na siya. Okay, roster, the last R would be the roster of electronics communications engineering. Kasi on the section 12, it will be the creation and composition of the board na. So creation and composition of the board, we have the powers and duties of the board. This is CC. CC, creation and composition. Powers is P. So CPD. CCPD. We have CC, that's creation and composition. PD, CPD. Powers and duties of the board, that's 13. Okay, there's too many for this one. What's that? Next one is 14, CPQ, CPCO. Okay, so I have created a previous one for this one, but I can also remember this through the CCPD, because the CPD is the professional development, continuing professional development, CPD. So anyway, I created the first mnemonics as C, P, and Q, I think. CPQ, because that's CPCO. CPQ is creation and composition of the board. P is the powers and duties of the board. We also have Q as the qualifications. So the qualifications of the board, that's section 12 papuntang section 14. The section 11, the roster of the electronics and communications engineers, I will put that now on the second part of our mnemonics. On the section 15, it says here term of office. So CPCO, uh, term of office. We also have here T, dalawang T, CR. Okay, this one's a little bit naughty. TTCR, PAD. CRRPAD, or PAD, CR, pad definitions, and EFP sounds familiar. EFP, we have the fonts, etc. I'm going to be reading this na lang. I'm gonna create the mnemonics afterward. Okay, when I'm, already there at the venue, and then, anyway. So in this part, we're going to be reading everything that is in the Electronics and Communications Engineering Act of the Philippines, or the RA number 5734. Okay, so we're going to be reading another copy. This is from chanrobles.com. Republic Act number 5734, and hopefully this will not have any errors anymore. Okay, typographical errors. Let's start with Republic Act number 5734, or the Electronics and Communications Engineering Act of the Philippines. Section 1, Title of Act. This act shall be known and cited as the Electronics and Communications Engineering Law of the Philippines. Section 2, Practice of Electronics and Communications Engineering. A. No person shall offer himself in the Philippines or use the title electronics and or communications engineer or any word, letter, figure or sign whatsoever tending to convey the impression that he is an electronics and or communications engineer or advertise or indicate in any manner that he is qualified to perform the work of an electronics and communications engineer without holding a valid certificate of registration as electronics and communications engineer issued by the board in accordance with this act, except as provided under section 11 hereof. Section 11 says roster of electronics and communications engineers. Okay, let's go back to section 2, letter B. Letter B says it shall be unlawful for any firm, company, or corporation to offer itself to the public as electronics and communications engineer without the certification, supervision, and or guidance a duly registered electronics and communications engineer. Okay, this one, the problem really is in the law. It lacks the of the word. Alright, so that's for section 2, letter B. Section A says about the person violating or malpracticing electronics and communications engineering. The letter B, this one is for practice and malpractice of any company, firm, or corporation. Now, for section 3, registration. Registration, specifically the certificates of registration. Section 3, registration, certificates of registration. A certificate of registration for electronics and communications engineer shall be issued to any applicant who passes the examination hereinafter provided upon payment of the required fees, provided that the first board may issue within a period not exceeding 2 years from the composition of the said board a certificate of registration as electronics and communications engineer without the necessary of undergoing the examination herein prescribed to its members and to any applicant who with his application for registration as electronics and communications engineer shall present evidence or other proof satisfactory to the board showing that, letter A, that he has a specific record of at least 10 years of active practice in electronics and or communications engineering. B, that he is of responsible character, indicating that he may be entrusted to perform or render professional electronics and or communications engineering service as defined in this act. And C, who is a bona fide member of any officially registered association of electronics and communications engineers in the Philippines. I'm somewhat confused with this word. Is it bona fide or bona fide? Every certificate of registration shall show the name of the registrant with a serial number and shall be signed by the members of the board, attested to by the secretary of the Board of Examiners, and duly authenticated by the official seal of the board. The certificate of registration issued by the board to the registrant shall be evidence that the person named therein is entitled to the rights and privileges of a registered electronics and communications engineer, while said certificate remains enforced or revoke. Section 4, Board Examination. Except as otherwise specifically provided herein, all applicants for registration as electronics and communications engineer shall undergo the required technical examination in accordance with this act. Section 5, Pre-qualifications for examination. In order to be admitted to the electronics and communications engineering examination, an applicant must, at time of the filing of his application, therefore, establish to the satisfaction of the board that, letter A, he is at least 21 years of age. Letter B, he is a citizen of the Philippines or of a foreign country qualified to take the examination under Section 23 of this Act. Letter C, he is of good moral character. Letter D, he is a holder of the degree of Bachelor of Science in Electronics and Communications Engineering or such equivalent engineering course from any school, institute, college, or university recognized by the government or the state where it is established. After completing a resident collegiate course of not less than 4 years, provided that within 3 years after the approval of this act, holders of a certificate of associate in electronics and communications engineering or any allied engineering course or holder of a valid first class radio telegraphy or radio telephony commercial operator license with at least 5 years active practice in electronics, communications, or allied fields shall be qualified to take the electronics and communications engineering examination. Section 6. Schedule of examination. Examinations for candidates desiring to practice electronics and communications engineering in the Philippines shall be given by the board twice a year in the city of Manila or in such other places as may be deemed necessary and expedient by the board. Section 7. Scope of examination. The examination for the practice of electronics and communications engineering in the Philippines shall consist of written tests, which shall cover such subjects as the board may prescribe. Section 8. Rating in the examination. To pass the examination, a candidate must obtain an average of 70% with no rating below 50% in any subject, provided that an applicant who fails to obtain a passing grade but who obtained at least 70% in each of at least one half of the total subjects given in the examination may be permitted to take within 2 years from the date of his examination another examination on subjects in which he obtained a grade below 70%. Should the examinee fail in a set of subject repeated in the second examination, he shall be required to take all the subject in the next examination. Section 9. Report of results or report of rules of examination. This should be results. Within 90 days of the examination, the board shall report the result thereof to the Commissioner of Civil Service, who shall act thereon within 30 days from receipt thereof. I'm going to have to repeat this. Section 9. Report of rules of examination. Within 90 days after the examination, the board shall report the result thereof to the Commissioner of Civil Service, who shall act thereon within the 30 days from receipt thereof. Section 10. Fees for examination and registration. Every applicant for examination for electronics and communications engineering shall pay an examination fee of 45 pesos and a registration fee of 10 pesos. Every applicant for registration without examination shall pay a fee of 55 pesos. The fee for a duplicate certificate shall be 10 pesos. All fees shall be paid to the disbursing officer designated by the board, and such officer shall pay from the receipt thereof all authorized expenses of the board, including the compensation of each member. Section 11. Roster of Electronics and Communication Engineers. A roster showing the names, the addresses, and the places of business of all registered electronics and communications engineer shall be prepared by the secretary of the board during the month of July every year, commencing 1 year after the date of the first board has been constituted. Copies of this roster shall be mailed to each person so registered, and the secretary of labor with copies furnished to all department heads, to the mayors of the chartered cities, to the Radio Control Office, to the Public Service Commissioner, to the Collector of Customs, to the Commissioner of Immigration, and to such other bureaus and or government agencies and provincial, city, and municipal authorities as may be deemed necessary, and to the public upon request. Section 12. Creation and composition of the board. Again, Section 12. Creation and composition of the board. There is hereby created a Board of Examiners for Electronics and Communications Engineers, hereinafter referred to as the Board. It shall be composed of the chairman and two members, all to be appointed by the President of the Philippines with the consent of the Commission of Appointments. From among the registered practicing electronics and communications engineers of recognized standing in the Philippines as certified to and by any official registered association of electronics and communications engineers in the Philippines who possess the qualifications prescribed in this act. The members of the first board shall be appointed within 2 years from the approval of this act from among those certified as duly qualified by the Institute of Electronics and Communications Engineers of the Philippines, a technical professional association duly organized under the laws of the Philippines. Section 13. Powers and duties of the board. The board is vested with the authority conformably with the provisions of this act to number 1, A. Administer the provisions of this act. B. Administer oaths in connection with the administration of this act. C. Issue, suspend, or revoke certificate of registration for the practice of electronics and communications engineering for justifiable cause. Letter D. Study the conditions affecting the electronics and communications engineering profession in the Philippines and exercise the powers conferred upon it by this and other acts with a view to the promotion, maintenance of ethical, moral, and professional standards in the practice of electronics and communications engineering. Letter E. Study, examine, and prescribe in cooperation with the Department of Education the essential requirements as to curricula and facilities of schools, colleges, or universities seeking permission to open courses or already offering courses in electronics and communications engineering, and to see to it that these requirements, including employment of qualified faculty members, are properly complied with. F. Recommend to the Department of Education or other entity concerned with the granting of school permits or authorization, the opening of colleges or schools and universities in electronics and communications engineering. G. Investigate violations of this act and for this purpose issue subpoena and subpoena duces tecum to secure attendance of witnesses in the production of documents in connection with the charges presented to and or any investigation pending before the board. And if any person shall refuse to obey any subpoena so issued or shall refuse to testify or produce any book, document, or other pertinent evidence required thereunder, the board may petition the proper court of first instance setting forth the facts, and thereupon such court in a proper case shall issue a subpoena to said person requiring him to appear before the board and there to testify and or produce such books, papers, documents, and other pertinent evidence as may be required by such subpoena. Any person failing or refusing to obey the subpoena or order of the said court shall be held liable in the same manner as for refusal to obey any other subpoena or order of the court. H. Establish and administer a code of ethics and fair practice for electronics and communications engineers of the Philippines. I. Recommend or adopt. so- I recommend or adopt from time to time and whenever necessary such measures as may be deemed proper for advancement of profession in keeping with the progress of the industry. J. Promulgate such rules and regulations as may be necessary to carry out the provisions of this act. Second, refusal to issue a certificate in cases. The first one is to administer, the second one is to refuse to issue a certificate in certain cases. The board shall refuse to issue a certificate of registration to any person convicted by a court of competent jurisdiction of any crime involving moral turpitude, to any person of immoral and dishonorable conduct, and to any person of unsound mind, furnishing the party concerned with a written statement containing the reason or reasons for such action, which statement shall be incorporated in the records of the board. 3. Revocation and suspension of certificates. The board shall revoke or suspend the validity of a certificate of registration as electronics and communications engineer issued to any registrant for any of the causes mentioned in the preceding section or for unprofessional or unethical conduct, malpractice, incompetence, or where fraud, deceit, or false statement was employed in obtaining said certificate of registration. Appeal from judgment. Number 4. The decision of the board shall become final after 30 days from the date of its promulgation, unless within said period any interested party has perfected an appeal to the office of the President whose decision shall be final. 5. Reinstatement and replacement of certificates. The board, upon application and for reasons of equity and justice, may reinstate the validity of a suspended certificate or issue another certificate in lieu of one previously revoked, upon payment of the required fees at least 2 years after such suspension or revocation. A new certificate of registration to replace any certificate lost, destroyed, or mutilated may be issued subject to the rules of the board and upon payment of the required fee. Section 14. Qualifications of board members. Each member of the board at the time of his appointment must be: letter A, a citizen and resident of the Philippines; letter B, at least 31 years of age and of good moral character; letter C, a registered electronics and communications engineer under this act; letter D, actually in active practice of the electronics and communications engineering occupation for at least 10 years in government service or in private. Letter E, not a member of the faculty of any school, institute, college, or university where a regular course in electronics communications or radio is taught. And if he has been such a faculty member, he has stopped teaching therein for at least 3 consecutive years immediately preceding his appointment. And the F, not financially interested directly or indirectly in any school, institute, college, or university where a regular course in electronics and communications engineering is taught. Section 15. Term of office. The members of the board shall hold office for a term of 3 years, provided the first appointee to the board shall hold office for the following terms: one member for 1 year, the other member for 2 years, and the third member for 3 years. Any vacancy occurring within the term of a member shall be filled for the unexpired portion of the term only. Each member of the board shall take the proper oath prior to the assumption of office. Section 16. The Executive Officer and the Secretary of the Board. The Commissioner of Civil Service shall be the executive officer of the board and shall conduct the examination given by the board according to the rules and regulations promulgated by him. The Secretary of the Board of Examiners shall also be the Secretary of the board. All records of the board, including examination papers, minutes of deliberations, and records of administrative proceedings and investigations, shall be kept by the Commissioner of Civil Service. Section 17. Compensation of the board. The members of the board shall each receive a compensation fee, a fee of 10 pesos for each applicant examined, and 10 pesos for each certificate of registration granted without prior examination. Section 18. Removal of board members. The President of the Philippines shall, upon recommendation of the Commissioner of Civil Service, may suspect or remove any member of the board for continued neglect of duty, incompetence, commission, or tolerance or irregularities in the examination, malpractice, or unprofessional or unethical conduct, after having given the member concerned an opportunity to be heard and or to defend himself in a proper administrative investigation. Section 19. Publication in Official Gazette. All rules, regulations, and code of ethics promulgated by the board under provisions of this act shall be published in the Official Gazette and shall be effective 15 days after publication therein. Annual Report. The board shall submit an annual report to the President of the Philippines at the close of each year, embodying such recommendation as it may deem proper. Section 21. Definitions. The following definitions, unless the context otherwise requires, shall govern in the application and construction of this Act. A. Board. The Board of Examiners for Electronics and Communications Engineers. B. Communications. The process of sending or receiving messages between two or more points by radio, electronics, or other electrical devices. C. Electronics. The science dealing with the development and application of devices and systems involving the flow of electrons in a vacuum, in gaseous media, plasma, and in semiconductors. Letter D. Electronics and Communications Engineer. A person who is qualified to hold himself out as electronics and communications engineer under this act and to affix his name the letters ECE. Section 22. Enforcement of the act by officers of the law. It shall be the duty of all duly constituted officers of the law of the national government or of any provincial, city, or municipal government to enforce the provisions of this act and to prosecute any person violating the same. The Secretary of Justice shall act as legal adviser of the board and shall render such legal assistance as may be necessary in carrying out the provisions of this act. Section 23. Foreign reciprocity. No foreigner shall be admitted to an examination or registration as electronics and communications engineer under this act unless he proves in the manner as provided by the board that, by specific provisions of law, the country, state, or province of which he is a citizen, subject, or national admits Filipino citizens to the practice of electronics and communications engineering after an examination on terms of strict and absolute equality with the citizens, subjects, or national of the said country, including the conditional recognition of prerequisite degrees issued by institutions of learning duly recognized by the government of the Philippines. Section 24. Penal provisions. The following shall be punished by a fine of not less than 2,000 pesos for more than 5,000 pesos, or by imprisonment for not less than 6 months nor more than 6 years, or both, in the discretion of the court. A. Any person who shall give false or fraudulent statements to the board to obtain a certificate of registration as electronics and communications engineer. B. Any person who shall present or use his own certificate of registration issued to another under this act. Letter C. Any person who shall present or use a revoked or suspended certificate of registration as electronics and communications engineer. Letter D. Any person who shall assume, use, or advertise as electronics and communications engineer, or append to his name letters or words tending to convey the impression that he is a registered electronics and communications engineer when in fact he is not duly registered with the board as such. Letter E. Any electronic and communications engineer or any person on his behalf who shall stamp or seal any document with his seal as such after his certificate of registration has expired or has been suspended or revoked. Letter F. Any electronics and communications engineer who shall sign his name, affix his seal, or use any other method of signature on plans, technical description, or other documents prepared by or under another electronics and communications engineer's supervision, unless the same is prepared in such manner as to clearly indicate the part or parts of such work actually performed by the former. Letter G. Any person except the electronics and communications engineer in charge who shall sign for any branch of the electronics and communications engineering work or any function or engineering practice not actually performed by him. H. Any person holding a certificate of registration who shall engage in any illegal wiretapping and or the employment of electronic devices in violation of the privacy of another or in disregard of the privilege of private communications or maintain an unlicensed and or unregistered communication system or device, and I. Any person who shall violate any provision of this act or any rules and regulations promulgated under this act. Section 25. Appropriation of funds. The sum of 10,000 pesos is hereby appropriated out of any funds in the National Treasury not otherwise appropriated to be disbursed by the board in accordance with the provisions of this act, All sums collected in accordance with this act shall be paid into the national treasury as part of the general funds thereof, provided that during the first 12 months of the operation of this act, any portion of the sums collected may be used for the purpose of this act to cover disbursement in excess of the amount appropriated herein. Section 26, Repealing Clause. All laws, executive orders, rules, regulations, or parts thereof in conflict with the provisions of this Act are hereby repealed or amended accordingly. Section 27, Separability of Provisions. If any provisions of this Act or any portion thereof is declared unconstitutional by any competent court, the other provisions thereof shall not be affected thereby. Section 28, Effectivity. This act shall take effect upon its approval, enacted without executive approval on June 21st, 1969. Oh yeah, enacted without executive approval. So this was published and approved legislative, but executive approval wala pa.